Welcome to another 15-minute Feature Friday. My name is Jacob Onstead. I'm a solutions engineer here at Milestone. I'm going to apologize, I've got a little bit of a cold, so I'm sorry about my voice, but today we're going to be talking about adaptive streaming. So what is adaptive streaming? It is a feature available in expert and corporate versions of 2019 R3 and later. Its main purpose is to improve performance of the smart client by reducing the stream resolution. It also helps alleviate bandwidth as well. So it works by automatically choosing the most appropriate video stream as far as the resolution goes, which is greater than the size of the actual view in the smart client. So this is just kind of a little diagram kind of showing how it works. In this case, if this camera had 3 streams, you'd have maybe a default record stream, and then you'd have a high res stream and a low res stream. Go into the recording server and then out to the clients, where in example 1 here, maybe you have 1 camera and a larger view. It would use that high stream with the most appropriate resolution to fit that window. But if you had, let's say, 6 views open, then it might use stream 3 as the lower one with the most appropriate resolution, okay? If you guys have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and I will answer them at the end. All right, so when should you use adaptive streaming? If you have issues maybe going over a WAN from one site to another as far as bandwidth goes, adaptive streaming can really alleviate that bandwidth utilization between sites. Absolutely improves the performance of the workstations and the recording servers because the workstations are not having to work as hard to transcode that video, and the recording servers don't have to output as high demanding streams as they normally would. Okay, so that in turn can reduce the hardware cost for the smart client workstations and even the recording servers as well. When should I not use adaptive streaming? So live mode is the only feature that adaptive streaming currently works in. Okay, it doesn't affect recording or playback features or edge recording. We do not want to use multicast, or we do not want to use adaptive streaming if you're using multicast. It's currently not supported, and that's multicast from recording server to client and from camera to recording server as well. Okay, so if you're in a multicast environment, at this point, adaptive streaming should be disabled. Okay. LPR, if you're using LPR, you want to try to not use adaptive streaming on those particular cameras that are using LPR. Could result in a low-res stream being sent to the LPR server. Milestone Mobile does not support it. Interconnect does not support it because the driver currently only supports 1 stream. And then camera dewarping. Okay, if you're using dewarping plugins on the smart client, adaptive streaming shouldn't be used for that either. Okay. So now we're going to do a demo. This is a short and sweet one here. So the first thing that you want to do in your devices is you want to go to, start with 1 camera, maybe test it out, and then go from there. So in this case, I'm going to use my Dryboy camera. So you will need multiple streams, obviously, to make this work. So as long as your camera supports multi-streaming, you can use this. Some cameras, in this case, my cameras only have 2, but as you well know, a lot of those Axis cameras and Hanwha and all those, they can do many streams, 5, 8, 10 streams. So there's really no limitation. But when you're setting these up and you're adding the multiple streams in here, you just want to make sure under live mode that you have when needed selected. Okay, if you have this on always, it may not work because it's going to always try to push that main stream. So just make sure you have when needed selected there. Okay, you can see this particular case, my main stream, video stream 1, I'm using for recording, and then I've got when needed selected for live mode on both of those. Okay, same with this guy here with my front door camera. We've got 2 on live mode. Okay, so once you've determined the number of streams you want to go to the stream settings. Okay, the nice thing about this is it works off of a resolution, so you can obviously the lower the resolution, the less demanding the stream is going to be on the workstation and the server. But the cool thing is if it actually determines this is the most appropriate stream, and you have a lower frames per second, maybe your GOP is a little different, it'll actually pull everything with that stream. It's not just going to change the resolution, it's actually pulling the stream number too. So you can make it even more effective by lowering the frames per second, okay? So you can see here, my default is 15 frames per second on stream 1, and it's 8 on stream 2. And then for this one, it's 15 here and 10 here, all right? So once you've got that configured, the next thing you're gonna wanna do is in the Smart Client, you wanna go to the settings, advanced, and there's a section here called adaptive streaming. By default, this is disabled. So you wanna come in here and enable it first, okay? And you can see right now, my frames per second on this camera is sitting around 10, and my video resolution is 480, which is that lower stream. But if I blow it up, it'll actually automatically pull that main stream at 1080p, okay? But again, if I shrink it down, it's gonna automatically go back down to the 480 stream. And same with my front door camera, it jumps up to 1080, 15 frames per second. And then when I shrink it down, it drops back to 480, back down to 8 frames per second, okay? This works just as well with even smaller tiles. So you can see here, again, we're using that 480 stream, okay? Now again, remember, it's going to pick the most appropriate resolution. So, you know, in this case, if I were to change the resolution to even lower, let's say we went down to 240 here, and 240 here. I'll refresh this. So you can see it actually, because of the size of the tiles here, it actually is reverting it back up to that higher resolution because it actually deems that the most appropriate, okay? But in this 18 tile, now, because the tiles are smaller, it's actually going down to that 240 resolution there, okay? And again, you can still see the frames per second. So real quick, let's go ahead and see how much this affects our CPU utilization, all right? So here I've got my my task manager open. We'll let this simmer down a little bit. So we're sitting around 90% on the CPU and about 50% on the GPU right now. But if I disable adaptive streaming, hopefully my computer doesn't freeze up on me here. And now you can see the CPU is completely pegged out. Not a whole lot of difference on the GPU there, but now my CPU is totally pegged out there. Okay. So again, we'll re-enable it. And give it a second, it should start to drop down there again, okay? And vice versa, we can do the same thing with this tile here. Just gonna show you guys one more time. Change this back to 480. And we should get that 480 stream coming in now. So, all right, so again, here we go with the CPU utilization dropping down a little bit there. Oh, actually, that's on the, yeah, no, that's right, okay. But, so little less cameras here, but same concept, right? Using less CPU, and then you can see it automatically starts pegging my CPU again. Okay. So again, you know, we're looking at minimizing cost on the Smart Client workstations, as well as recording servers and minimizing bandwidth. Okay. So any questions so far? Let me look. I don't see any questions in the chat. If you guys have any, go ahead and feel free to post them there, and I'll be happy to answer those. All right, my first question is from Anthony. Will it eventually be available on mobile? I don't know. That is a good question. Maybe if any of the other SCs in the meeting have an answer to that. I would say that would be a great feature if they ever got around to it. So stay tuned on that one. In the example given, are all 3 streams streaming to the recording server even when they are not being used as Smart Client? That's a great question. So by default, when we enable streams on a camera, they are all technically being streamed to the recording server regardless of whether they're actually being used or not. And the reason for that is there's a rule, a default rule called the default start feed rule. And that rule basically by default means that all streams, we're actually always requesting all streams from the camera. So even though they may not be being used at the moment, they actually are always streaming. So that is a good question and definitely something to keep in mind. You can always edit this rule and you can play around with it to, only request the feed if it's needed. So that is possible, but by default, yes, all streams from the camera are being requested by the recording server. Will it eventually be available for other platforms like Pro Plus, etc.? At this point, it's like I said, it's just expert and corporate only for those higher tier. But maybe in the future, they may realize the market demand for it, that they could change that. And this has no CPU effect on the server. It will have a slight effect on the recording server because again, if let's say you have 10 clients out there requesting 12 streams a piece from the recording server has to generate those streams, right? So if the stream is less demanding, it's also less demanding on the recording server as well. The recording server does not have to generate those higher demanding streams with the higher resolution, the higher frame rate. Okay, so that also lowers the overall throughput on the recording server as well. Unlike what we see with transcoding, what's the best option for take photo and save it without using snipping? Oh. So if you guys haven't seen our snapshot option, somebody asked what is the best option to take a photo and save it without snipping. I'm assuming you're talking about within the Smart Client. So in the Smart Client, there's a button here called Create Snapshot. If you click that, by default, it goes to a folder called, it's a little off topic, but I'll go ahead and answer it since we've got, if you guys want to hang around on your C drive, there's a folder called Snapshots. And by default, this is where all your snapshots would go here. Okay, so this is the one I just took. Okay, a little off topic, but that's how you would do that. You don't need to use the snipping tool. Okay. Will it eventually be available for the mobile client? I already answered that. Pro Plus snipping. What's the total matrix size? I'm not sure I understand. In regards to the views, you can have up to, I think 100 is the max amount of cameras in one view. Obviously, we don't really recommend doing that, but if somebody needs it, that's what we can do. So it's 11:15 now. If you guys want to drop off, you're more than welcome to, but I will hang out and keep answering some of these questions. Do we run into disk cache issues because of the higher string count per camera? No, because the only stream that's going to actually go to disks is that recording stream. Okay, so we don't record multiple streams. There's only one default recording stream. So that's a good question. So nowhere we're not going to run into throughput issues to the disk with multi-streaming. Okay. All right. Any more questions? If not, you guys have a great rest of your Friday and a great weekend. And thank you for joining.